Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of For Fake's Sake. We are a podcast by artists for artists. It doesn't matter if you're a hobbyist or a professional. We just want to speak our mind, and hopefully it's something that resonates with you. This is the second part of a two-part series on the algorithm. If you'll remember, in our last episode, we talked about the 5 W's and how to relate that to your career and social media usage. Feel free to check that out if you haven't already, but you don't necessarily need to listen to it to get something out of this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in again. We really appreciate the support, and I hope you enjoy this week's episode.
Now, what to do with this information or these 5 W's, is to create content. Once you answer those questions, now you can create content. And there's a few ways you can create content. Now, I have a list.
Ooh.
Are you ready for this?
Absolutely.
It's a long list.
Let's do it.
All right, this is the content you can create on social media. Live stream, comments, videos, groups, mentions, stories, questions, audio, captions, keywords, images, and hashtags.
That's it?
That was 12 things I just listed.
I feel like there'd be more.
No, I think that's it. How you make different ones is, another point. But that's really everything you can do on social media. You can make posts, you can make stories, and you can make, depending on the different platforms, like you can make TikToks, which is just, there's only one thing you can make on TikTok, or live stream, YouTube videos or live stream. Twitch is only live stream. Twitter, you can do image posts, you can do audio posts, you can do links, you can do whatever,
I guess it's not necessarily the tools available, it's how you use them, and that's why it feels like there's more. It's like there's so much nuance in how you utilize all of these tools to better promote yourself and better reach your audience.
Absolutely. And the most engaging ones, I'm told, are questions. So posing a question with your posts. For example, if I want to promote my book, which came out this week, hashtag June for short, hashtag go buy it now. Perhaps I want to pose the question, who is June? Do you want to know who this character is? You should buy my book, and that will tell you. So if I wanted to promote that post, I would start with a question, and then I would tell you why you should read it, where you should go to read it, what is it going to be about, who is it for? All of these questions have to be answered in one post, and that's where all the thought comes into it. So that's one way of doing it, is with posing a question. Another way of doing it is by stirring a little bit of controversy. And this is a questionable method. I'm not going to say it's positive or negative. We don't make those kinds of calls on this podcast. But, for example, being relevant is crucially important on social media. You've probably noticed a trend where something happens in the world and everybody makes a post about it. Everybody puts in their 2 cents. So if a really big artist or musician dies, everybody posts about it, right? Or at least they used to. I don't know if they still do. The war in Ukraine. Everyone right now is posting, I stand with Ukraine. Things like that, like putting their 2 cents into these relevant topics. And so controversy doesn't have to be necessarily a bad thing. It's simply a means of staying relevant. So, or just inciting thought. You might notice on TikTok there's a lot of controversial TikToks, and there's some people who make their whole TikTok profile based on stirring up controversy. I think Logan Paul might be one of the best examples of someone who has succeeded by being controversial.
It's interesting that you put it that way, but I feel like there's a nuance to it that might be getting lost in specific examples. Like, here's a more subtle approach to stirring up controversy. There's this TikTok profile, I can't remember her name, but basically the entire gimmick for her is that she dresses up in, like, really poorly done makeup. Like, it's very obviously done poorly intentionally, and she talks in a very loud, grating voice, and she engages with people in that typical influencer way, but it's amped up to a degree that it's kind of irritating.
Yeah.
And her entire comment section is just people being like, why are you still posting? Is this girl still on here?
Yeah.
Like, you know that everyone hates you, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, negative attention is still attention.
For artists, like, the way I can stir controversy is by... Well, actually, you know what? I have a very good example. Because in my story, I have a controversy. It's... In this next issue, I have a drug overdose. That is controversial. Whether it's positive or negative, I'm simply stating that a character in my story has a drug overdose. And there are consequences to that behavior. And that is controversial. That it's not necessarily like a bad controversy, like making people angry. It's simply bringing up a topic that people might be uncomfortable talking about.
Exactly. And I guess this could kind of tie into my vulnerability on Facebook. I have a similar experience to your character. I had an overdose event in 2018, and one of the things that I was opening up about on Facebook and providing some insight into was the journey that I've had since the overdose in 2018, which included outpatient care, being put on medication, like a lot of different therapists, etc. Basically, the point of the post was to say that, healing is a journey. I'm in a better place now. Like, I'm watering it down a bit, but I was truly very vulnerable in the post. And people loved it, not necessarily because it was controversial, but just because a unique human experience that isn't that uncommon, but is super taboo, is finally getting some airtime. And people can feel like they can open up. People feel like they can relate to you. People feel like the world isn't so strange and foreign anymore. Because there's two sides to media curation. One side is to sell you something and to keep you as far removed from, like, our interconnectivity as possible. And the other side is, like, very independent, very earnest, very heartfelt content that doesn't really see the light of day, but it doesn't need to. There are circles here. It doesn't need to. You can still have an impact, you can still have a presence, and your work can still be meaningful, even if you don't have a lot of engagement.
Right. And, there are ways to get engagement on that second path. They're just going to be more hidden or more obscure or more challenging. I mean, there are great examples of people who create super wholesome content, and they do get that promotion without that controversy. I think one of the things that you and I like to talk about is the Brendan Fraser renaissance. And almost collectively on social media, everyone just is talking so positively about Brendan Fraser because we never stopped loving him. And there's just some great wholesome content, and there's no controversy there,
I feel like this is a conversation you and I are both very invested in, and it does tie into the algorithm. We've been talking about how the algorithm is neither good nor bad. It's a tool, and you need to understand how to use it, or you at least need to understand how it's going to affect you and your performance online. But, with using all of these tools, you ultimately need to decide what your end goal is. Because if you want to be seen, if you want high engagement, if you want that performance to be good, you understand that there's something that you're giving up. You're giving up some amount of autonomy in service to this larger creature, this larger machination that will produce money and income streams, but also visibility. But at what cost?
Yes.
Like, at that point, you really are walking on eggshells. You have to curate yourself. You have to maintain a brand, and you have to be uncontroversial.
Absolutely right. You have to be uncontroversial while still, keeping people interested. How many social media, big folks have been sucked into some sort of controversy? Here's a great example. So I brought up Jacksepticeye earlier because I'm a huge fan of his. And I grew up sort of on the periphery of those like big YouTubers. Wasn't like a really big part of my childhood, because I think by the time they got really present on YouTube, I was past the age where it was like, I don't know. I don't want to put it that way. I wasn't on YouTube when they were getting big. That's how I'll put it. I wasn't on YouTube when they were gaining fame. And now that I am more present on YouTube, like PewDiePie was someone who I always heard like really negative things said about him. And in my mind, it was someone who was not a good person, or like a negative sort of feeling towards him. And I had no reason to feel that way. I'd never seen one of his videos before. I'd only heard like sort of negative things mentioned around the name PewDiePie. And then I actually watched a couple of his videos and I was like, he seems all right. Like, I don't know. What was this all about? I don't know.
Well, I think part of it is just if you get big enough, no matter what, people are going to have opinion about you.
Absolutely.
I mean, I hate that I was this person growing up, but I didn't like Disney Channel. I didn't like, Wizards of Waverly Place or Zack and Cody. The things that people my age were into, the popular things at the time.
Oh, I love Zack and Cody.
And I know that dates myself a little bit. I respect that. Did you get to go on that cruise?
No.
The Danimals cruise?
Yeah, I was the Danimals kid. I didn't go on the cruise.
We finally found her after all of these years.
Yeah, no.
Anyway. My grander point being that, like, there were people that I didn't like simply because they were popular. I didn't want to like the popular thing. So it doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter, like, how earnest you are. At the end of the day, you can't please everyone. And that's another reality to accept when you're a content creator.
Totally true. Yeah. And, my impressions of these content creators were completely happenstance. Like, I'm certain I heard one or two people say a couple of negative things about someone on YouTube, and then I just didn't bother actually like figuring it out for myself. So my impression of these creators was what I had been told rather than an actual impression. My impression of these content creators and YouTubers was from the perspective of somebody who told me rather than what I experienced myself. A really good example, I think, of this sort of peripheral or vicarious opinion is, I remember in high school, without going into too much detail because this is a sensitive topic, but I was told by several other students that a certain teacher had like inappropriate pedophilic materials on their computer and they were fired for it, which was a rumor and was not true. I remember hearing that and I was like, where did this come from? And the truth is, teenagers just love to make rumors up that are interesting. That's what it comes down to.
Or like not even interesting. I feel like it's a little bit, you got to tiptoe around that a little bit because that's very serious. Like false allegations are incredibly serious. But the thing is when you're a teenager, I think when you're sub 30, there's no way around it. You're still stupid. You're still figuring stuff out. But especially when you're a teenager, it's going to be very difficult to make wise moral decisions when you're full of hormones and school really sucks and people are awful to you or people are really nice to you, but you just don't know what you want and you're still under your parents' roof and life is so difficult. I get it. We've all been teenagers. So, like, that's just like a breeding ground for negative attention. That's a breeding ground for controversy. And social media isn't any different. Social media is populated with these messy individuals.
It's the burn book of Mean Girls, book. This teacher pissed me off, so I'm going to make up a rumor about how they probably sell drugs. And in Mean Girls, she didn't intend to start the rumor. She just, like, expressed this sort of frustration, and it took on a life of its own to the point where this teacher was actually accused. And this is a movie, but that happens all the time. That's a very real sort of consequence of airing frustrations, and I think that it happens all the time on social media. I'll give you the tips that I figured out. You ready for this?
Please, yeah. Help me out, please.
Hot tips. Okay. So create your own algorithm. So using those elements that I listed off before, like live streaming, commenting, videos, groups, mentions, stories, questions, audio, captions, keywords, images, and hashtags. Blah, 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 blah. Use those things to create an algorithm. I mean, make a plan, figure out your 5 W's, and then use all of those behaviors to create your own algorithm. So maybe, for example, you go live on Instagram once a month, or comment on X number of posts a day. And it sounds dry and it sounds not genuine, because it kind of is not genuine, but you also have to sound genuine when you do it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So be consistent. I mean, have certain behaviors on social media that are repeated. People like repetition. People like expectations. They like to see you post every day, and they like to look forward to a new post. Like, there's certain YouTubers that have burned out because they were posting so regularly, and they were like, I just can't keep up with all this content. I cannot make this much content for you guys. But people love the constant content flow. That's why people love diary comics or daily comics. Maybe they're not the highest quality comics, but they're every single day. I'm not knocking daily comics. I know a few daily cartoonists, and they do great work. It's totally cool.
Fundamentally, I understand what you're saying, because ultimately what it comes down to is like time constraints, and different artists are going to be able to produce different content within those same constraints. But
Correct.
Ultimately, if you're given a day to do a task, it's probably not going to be as good as something you were given a week to do.
Correct.
But you're right. It's constant media production and sharing it and being engaged. But
Yep.
As someone who really values her free time and her privacy, how do I go about engaging the algorithm and using it to my advantage when I don't want to commit that much of my time to social media?
Well, you might have to, and you don't have to do it in a way that's like, I feel like I am a slave to social media. It can simply be taking an hour or two out of every morning to create content that is for social media. And I don't mean to sit down and draw something for an hour and that's going to be your post for the day. What I mean is gathering what content you already have, because I know you have a lot. So designing this content to be in service of your social media algorithm, or your brand, as they say. So it can be a text post in the form of an image, or it can be a story, or it can be some sketches. One of the things that they say a lot is tell a story with your posts. So maybe you don't have a finished piece, but you have a couple of warm-up drawings or a couple of sketches that go underneath it, and you can be like, okay, here's a work in progress, check in later for the next development or whatever. On TikTok, a lot of people do parts of stories, so they break the story up into 5 parts, and they're like, check in tomorrow for the next part or whatever. So taking that small amount of time to do a couple of comments, follow a couple of hashtags, follow a couple more people, or reach out to a couple of people, or plan posts. So that, I think planning posts is maybe one of the most important parts of a social media strategy that most people don't want to do. And you can schedule posts on Instagram through Facebook. It's a whole thing. You have to have a business account. It has to be linked to your Facebook, but you can do it. It's just hard to, because they don't want you to. But yeah, it's going to take a lot of forethought beforehand. But once you have your own algorithm in place, your own behavior in place. It's a matter of putting it into practice. So planning time to comment on things, planning time to post, planning time to live stream, planning time to do this. It's once you get all the work done ahead of time, I really think you can get away with being less engaged in social media while having the audience engage more for you.
And that's part of the reason why I asked earlier about the whole, let's say I don't want to commit that time. Like, let's say the whole process just doesn't gel well for me. Like, maybe I'm not ready to do that. This is part of the reason why we're having an episode on
That's totally okay.
Exactly. We're having this episode so you understand how all of this works, at least as far as we understand it. Again, please do your own research and trial and error on your end. You'll figure it out. But you also need to acknowledge that this is labor. This is a time commitment. Like, no matter what it is you do, it doesn't matter what your discipline is. It doesn't matter if this is professional for you or a hobby. If you want to have a large media following, you're going to have to give up a lot of your time. You're going to have to give up a lot of your labor and a lot of your resources, and you need to plan accordingly.
Absolutely. And that's why, people make a career out of this. This is a whole other job. It's okay if you don't have the energy or the resources to do this yourself, because it's a lot of work. And that's one of the things Ash and I talk about a lot. I don't know if we've talked about it on this podcast, but we talk about it with each other all the time about how being a freelance artist it's like having 5 jobs at once. It is not easy, and most of the time you're underpaid for all of those jobs. You have to be your own scheduler, you have to be your own promoter, you have to be your own feeder, cook, clother, you have to do all of this stuff by yourself. You don't get to outsource any of it at first. Maybe later on you succeed and you can afford an assistant, or you can afford a social media coordinator, whatever. But it's a lot of work, and you have to do it if you want it to work for you. If you want social media to be a place where you can earn income, it is a whole other job. And the reason I even wanted to do this episode, and the reason I did all this research beforehand, was that I realized I could actually really use social media. I think the way I sell my art is through a personal touch, but it's impossible to have a personal touch when your audience is kind of all over the world. I really do have an audience that spans several countries, and I don't get to be there in person for all of them, and I have to find a way for my social media to step in for me and be that tool. I think, I want to put in that work, but I haven't yet, because I just did all this research, because I'm just now starting to figure it out. And I have been on, I'm a millennial. I've been on social media I've been on at least Twitter since it started. I've been on Instagram for many, many years, and I still don't know how it works. And algorithms change. These things evolve over time, and you have to evolve with them. Or you can speak out against the changes, and sometimes Instagram listens, sometimes YouTube listens, but not always. But it is a time consumption. It is a time dedication, and you have to be prepared to give it a lot of work beforehand before you put a system in place that actually works for you. All of this is work that you put in beforehand that you don't get paid for, and that is the name of the game in freelance.
And I feel like this is a good time to bring up accessibility, because oftentimes the problem with people who are just starting to freelance or just starting to dip their toes into like an independent contract kind of world, just understand you don't need to seed a lot of money up front. Like, you really don't have to. As we stated earlier, the system is set against you, but still continue to upload, continue to share your work, because as long as you're there, as long as it's held somewhere, there's a place for people to find you. And continue to make your work, continue to put the effort in, And there are other ways to get seen without having to spend money and without using just social media platforms. I would suggest, if you have the time and the resources, put as much energy as you can into a portfolio that is varied and only your best work, and look up some agencies and the fields that you're interested in getting into. Like, let's say you want to get into publishing, or you want to get into film, or you want to get into advertising. Do some Googling. The internet is your friend. Find an agency, submit your portfolio, do that until someone sees you, do that until you get a project.
Absolutely. And that's going to be the same thing as social media. It's a different tool, just with like the same sort of efforts behind it. I mean, what you are essentially doing on social media is building a portfolio to grab somebody's attention. And when you do that through Google, through Publishers Marketplace, or just reaching out to agents or other people hiring, or on LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn is another social media outlet that is basically, it's professional social media. You are curating and creating a portfolio to be shared through that platform. And, be engaged. If you stay on social media and if you have regular behaviors, those things are favored by the algorithm. They just take time. All of this is just going to take time. And that is probably the one part that I think frustrates people the most. You can put in all your effort. You can follow all those tips, like keeping posts engaging by asking questions or making videos instead of posting stills, or using music that catches somebody's attention, or asking a controversial question, whatever. You can keep doing all of that, but it only works if you keep doing it over and over and over, and eventually you do get recognized. It just takes time.
I would also like to say that this isn't like, you don't need success. You don't need a large following. What you need is enough. What you need is the people that are gonna care about your work to keep them engaged.
Oh, that is 100% true.
Yeah. If this is something that's going to deteriorate your mental health and it's going to like drive you into the ground because you don't have 10K followers, you don't have 40K followers, you don't have 1 million followers, that's okay. You don't need to have that many. That's not what it takes to be successful. That's not what it takes to have a livable lifestyle. What you need is for the right people to be engaged with your work and to continue to remind them that you're out there. That's all that matters. If you want to become like a large-scale media influencer, understand that at that point, a lot of your own autonomy and creative wishes will be taken out of the process. You will have to curate it and pare it down to a point where it's not necessarily where you want it to be, because you are no longer making things that make you happy. You are making things that you know are going to get people's attention. So you have to balance it. It's all about balance. Understand that these are the tools. Understand that you can or you don't have to use them. And understand that everyone has different needs, especially with their own work. Like, your work doesn't need to have a large following. Your work just needs to have the right following.
Well, that's absolutely correct. I mean, it's worth mentioning right now. Social media engagement is far more important in the algorithm than the number of likes or the number of follows. It is always going to be outweighed by the number of saves and the number of comments and the number of the mentions, are pretty important as well. That's why giveaways are very successful for a lot of people, because you have to mention so many people. But that being said, because this is a tool of social media, you cannot use it as a reflection of yourself as an artist. And I'm 100% guilty of having sat there and put my heart and soul into a social media post and to see that it had no engagement, and taking that personally. That's a pretty natural reaction, but you have to keep in mind that's not your fault. It is because there's an algorithm in place. I just started a YouTube channel. There is no algorithm behind it because it just started. So no, I'm not going to get 1 million views on my first video. And my Instagram account has a decent number of followers for me, but I also didn't know how any of this worked until now. Let's do it. Let's do the challenge. Let's see if this actually works. Let's see if we gain followers, because you know what? If we don't, it doesn't matter. We're still going to keep making the same art, and we're still going to be, Ash and I are each other's biggest fans. So
absolutely,
if we have each other, that's cool.
And to piggyback off of that a little bit, we are each other's biggest fans, but I want to reiterate, when Az asked me why people should follow me, and I said that I am a damn good artist, that's not an objective statement. You are welcome to dislike my art. Please do if it's not your style. But as a creator, I have to be my number one fan. Like, I have to like my artwork. I have to be encouraged to return to the drawing table every day to keep making stuff. Because if I place my sense of self-worth in an algorithm or social media performance, I would burn out pretty fast.
And you have to have someone, the way Ash and I think, have each other as a sort of sounding board. I finally figured out what the word was. It's not bellwether, it's sounding board.
Oh, I love it.
But, Ash and I have each other as these sort of like critique partners. We have a group of critique partners from school that we're still in touch with. Like, having those people in your life is so much more important as a creator than having a certain number of followers. That is going to be the most crucial part of being an artist and being a creator, period.
That's something that we touched upon before, but really, you don't need the art school experience. What you need is to find people who give a damn about your work, who are also creating good work, and who are willing to give you the time to just continue to grow together. And that's very hard to find, but if you are passionate about your output, if you're passionate about the things you want to bring into the world, you're not alone. There are other people that feel the same way, and there are going to be people that are very similar to you. So just keep putting yourself out there. Eventually you'll find your tribe.
Yep, absolutely. But if you do want to use social media as a tool to grow your audience, outside of not using it as a means to measure your self-worth, if you want to use social media as a means to measure not even measure, just to find people to buy your stuff, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what you need. You need people to buy your things. Do the research, put in the time, answer those 5 questions, those 5 W's, because that is the same as being an artist, like figuring out why you do what you do, who you want it to be for. All of that is really important to being a creator, and those need to be answered before you can even think about using social media as a tool.
I agree with that, and I'm not trying to be a contrarian, but also I feel like the process for me at least is much more fluid. It takes a lot of time to figure out what it is exactly that you want, especially if you're an artist, because there's so many things you can do, so many places you can go. So it takes you a while. It takes a lot of trying new things and failing and
I
going
don't think
somewhere
you're being
new.
contrarian. I think that's totally
Okay,
fair.
good.
Yeah, no, it's if you cannot answer those 5 W's, that's okay. That's part of your journey as a creator. But just know that those 5 W's, they're a huge part of your art, period. And the answers evolve. The answers change as you as an artist change. Those are not set in stone and concrete. And I think that is where social media and being a creator kind of clash, in that your social media algorithm wants you to stay the same, whereas as an artist, that's just not possible. It's just not how it works.
Exactly.
I don't know. I think I've said everything I need to say.
I was going to say, I feel that this was a very successful encapsulation of the algorithm. I think we put enough nuance in there so it's applicable to any creative, no matter where they are or what they want to do with their work. Yeah. That was my hope, because the algorithm is so big. It's so tied into how we get seen online, but it's also a large source of grief, and that's why you and I and many other artists in my life constantly despair over it, because it's a balancing act, and it's very difficult, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible.
And also, crossovers work. So if you have people on social media that you support, like I support Ash as a creator and as a friend, I will always link her when I post things about our podcast. I will always mention her I'll always comment on her stories. I'll always save them. I'll always like them. Not because I'm trying to boost her algorithm, but because I'm just a big fan of hers. But you're not alone. Don't be an island on social media. Be your own best friend, but also be friend to others. Be social on social media. And if you can't do that, that's okay. Just know that that's what the algorithm favors.
What is it you said again? Designed to get seen less, so you have to pay for exposure?
Absolutely. And especially if you are a business account, which if you want to use Instagram to promote your work, you probably should have a business account. But if you have a business account, you are far more likely to be suppressed. So just know that the system is built to discourage you.
But don't be discouraged.
Exactly.
Don't be discouraged.
Exactly. You can beat the system. Do your own research. It's not a lot of research, honestly. There's a couple of websites. I think Shopify is one that had some really good like social media insights that I looked into. There's one called Iconosquare. I actually brought this up so I can share it with you. I did something called a social media audit, or an Instagram audit. Ooh. That's what it's called. And I can tell you right now that, and it was free. I didn't pay for it, which was very cool of Iconosquare. So Iconosquare is a paid social media strategy website. I'm not promoting them. They haven't promoted us. But they did give me this free Instagram audit, which I thought was pretty fun. So like some things that it said like, oh, these are good things. You have an avatar, your account is a business account, you have a short bio, and you have a URL. But you don't have any mentions in your Instagram bio. I did change that. I was like, oh, that's a really good point. I can change it so that I can link to other things so people know if you like this, then you'll like me. You can add hashtags to your bio, your follower to following ratio, your average reach, like things like this, your average impressions, your average likes, and the number of visits to your profile, things like this. And once you see what you are doing well and what you're not doing well, then you can design things like, oh, okay, if I'm not getting people to come to my profile, maybe I can encourage them to come to my profile by saying, check out the rest of my work on my profile or whatever, things like that. That's why trends work. That's why these new features that Instagram and Facebook keep introducing, try them out because there's an audience there. There's something new happening all the time, and you can just be there. I think just being there might actually encourage people to check you out.
Exactly. And, I think we can share those links in the podcast episode notes, right?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, let's do that. And just so you guys can try it out yourselves, see if the shoe fits, get what you need out of it. If not, that's okay too, but here are some resources that we can provide for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sperry, for doing all of this research. I feel so much more informed on algorithms, and I thought I understood them before we did this, but thank you so much for that.
No problem.
I have a lot that I need to try out.
Didn't understand them myself, and that's why I was happy to do the research. That's why I love this podcast, by the way. I love having this sort of like, I'm curious about this and I want to learn more about it. How about I do all this research and then share it with you guys, because, the best way to learn, or you know it well when you can explain it to someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you have any suggestions for things that you're interested in figuring out and you haven't done the research, maybe I haven't either, and maybe I'll do it for you.
Or maybe we haven't. It's something that we're fascinated about and we can talk about for an hour and 10 minutes.
Yes, I will happily share those resources with you. Feel free to check in with me on social media. Say, hey, how's it going? How's your attempt at gaining followers going? Because I am going to try it. I did this research to try to implement it myself, and we'll see how this goes. We'll check in next week.
Well, thank you, Sperry. This has been a great podcast. I'm really happy with how this episode went.
Oh, I am too. And as far as social media goes, like your friends' posts, save them, click the share button, be engaged, and your friends will return the favor. I guarantee it.
All right.
All right, thanks for listening. And again, music by Divorce Action John. Go check him out. I'll put his
Thank you, Johnny.
I'll put his SoundCloud in the description. All right, Ash, it's been phenomenal. I'll see you next week.
It's a pleasure as always. See you next week.